Hi, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to Science on Tap. I'm Naomi Gonzalez, the Education and Interpretation Specialist from the Science History Institute, and I'm going to be hosting tonight's program. Before we begin, the Science History Institute would like to acknowledge that it stands on Lenapehoking, land long sacred to the Lenape people. The Science History Institute honors and respects the Lenape people as caretakers of this land in the past, the present, and the future. I would also like to take a moment to request your participation in maintaining a safe and welcoming space by adhering to our community guidelines, which will be posted in our chat in just a minute. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. Science on Tap is a free monthly gathering held on the second Monday of each month. And that features presentations by scientists or other experts, followed by lively conversations and great Q&A. Science on Tap is sponsored by a consortium of 6 Philadelphia institutions. They include the Academy of Natural Sciences of Drexel University, the American Philosophical Society, the Mutter Museum of the College of Physicians of Philadelphia, the Penn Museum, the Science History Institute, and the Wagner Free Institute of Science. If you love us, please follow us on Facebook, Science on Tap Philly. And you can also join our email list, which you can do if you visit our website, scienceontapphilly.com. Again, that's scienceontapphilly.com. Before introducing tonight's speaker, I do want to give you a preview for next month's Science on Tap, which is going to take place on Monday, November 8th at 6 p.m. It'll feature Adam Dewson, the founder of 100 Fruit Farms. His talk is going to focus on permaculture and agroecology. We're going to release more information about his talk and a registration for his registration link for his talk on our Facebook page and our website. So make sure you check back there for more information. So now on to tonight's talk. I'm pleased to introduce tonight's speaker, Francesca Tuazon. I do apologize if I mispronounced that, Francesca. Francesca recently completed her PhD in cell and molecular biology at the University of Pennsylvania Perelman School of Medicine, where she studied the development of early zebrafish embryo. At her microscope, Francesca found inspiration in the everyday miracles she observed. The first cell dividing after fertilization, chromosomes segregating during mitosis, platelets flowing to the heartbeat. She came to the powerful realization that the natural world doesn't care who a person is or where a person comes from. As long as they are curious and resourceful, they can discover the wonders of nature. Combined with her lifelong passion for art and her undergraduate art history training from the University of Virginia, this realization guides her vision of a more inclusive world through embracing the creativity in science. Currently, Dr. Tuazon is settling into her new home in Elkins Park, Pennsylvania. So thank you so much for joining us today, Francesca, and take it away.
Thanks, Naomi. I'm really happy to be here. I'm excited to kick off the fall Science on Tap season. And thank you to everyone here for joining me and sharing your time and your curiosity. And so I can see some of the comments coming up from the Facebook Live. And so to test this out, I'd love if you could comment where you're joining from, and if you're a Science on Tap regular or if this is your first time. As Naomi mentioned, this event is usually in person at National Mechanics, a bar in Philadelphia. And so it's a bummer that we're not together in person for that, but it is cool that this can be virtual. So my goal for this talk today is for everyone, scientists and non-scientists alike, to really broaden your idea of science. And I hope that you'll discover that you're a bit more of a scientist or an artist even than you thought. Ooh, I'm seeing the comments coming in now. I'm on a little delay. Sorry, guys. Oh, but we're reaching NYC and throughout, even Portland, Tampa. Awesome. Thank you, guys. Welcome. So, as Naomi mentioned, I recently completed my PhD in cell and molecular biology from the University of Pennsylvania. And so you see me here at my trusty microscope, which Naomi also mentioned, and I'll get into in a little bit. But before that, as an undergraduate, I actually was equally as hooked on art history as I was on biology. I relished everything from ancient Egyptian art to modern art, and this passion culminated in a semester abroad in Italy, which is actually what's pictured here on the left. So this is all to say that I brought this love of art and art history with me as I pursued science professionally. And tonight is all about marrying these two perspectives. And I am so, so excited to share just how viscerally similar I think these two disciplines can be. So for my graduate research, I used the zebrafish as my model organism. So these are small freshwater fish about the size of your thumb that are actually native to the Ganges River in India. But fun fact, they can be found in almost every pet store here in the States. And what is so cool about the zebrafish as a model organism is that you can set up the males, the kind of skinnier pink guy on the bottom, and the females, which are fatter and have that big white belly, and they'll mate and drop the fertilized eggs in the water, which then I, the scientist, can collect and watch develop. So, in a nutshell, my graduate research was understanding this process of early development and how the early newly fertilized embryo then becomes the fish-like juvenile organism. And in the zebrafish, this happens in under 24 hours, which is really remarkable. And so something that was alluded to through all of my microscope pictures is that I spent a lot of time looking at these embryos under the microscope. And I would watch them develop kind of day in, day out. And so I wanted to share that sight with you today through this time lapse. And what you're seeing right now is one cell became two, those two cells continue to divide to 4, and then 8, and then so on. So these cells are continuing to divide, and now they're going to move and actually completely reorganize. So even on my hardest days, seeing this under the microscope just really struck me and put me in awe of the beauty and the precision of this process. What you're seeing is that in less than 24 hours, you have something that looks like a fish with a clear head, with an eye, and a tail. And really, this continues to take my breath away every time and instills this sense of wonder that I named this talk after. And what I found interesting was that this is the same feeling that I got when I saw art that truly moved me, when I'd be stunned by the beauty or the scale of a piece while being equally in awe of the precision and the skill required to make it. But that also kind of surprised me. Art and science sharing some deep similarity, that didn't quite compute. Generally, art and science seem separate, even incompatible at times. When you think science, what comes to mind? You can put that in the comments and we can maybe go back to that a little bit later. But when I think science, what comes to mind, honestly, is an all-white lab and a lab coat and this really sterile environment where everything is precisely measured and things are black and white and results are objective. And honestly, those words, sterile, precise, objective, that doesn't really sound like art to me. When I think of art, I think of something colorful, bold, beautiful. And really, the most important part is a distinct point of view. It's a mode of one individual or individual's perspective. So that left me wondering, what can art and science possibly share? Well, what I'll tell you today is that I think there are actually two key principles that link art and science together. The first is the technique, or the how, that both art and science are achieved through this level of skill and precision and tools. The second is the purpose or message, or whatever, what can we learn from both science and art. So I'll tackle the first, technique, first. And so something that I learned through my graduate training and my many hours at the bench was that, that I actually think of scientists as artisans. There are a lot of fine motor skills involved in doing science. In this image that you're seeing, there's a scientist using one of the standard tools of our trade, the pipette. And this person is moving tiny volumes of liquid around. And for most scientists, honestly, anything important to us are usually in a tiny droplet of liquid, whether that's chemicals or samples or reaction intermediates. So I began through my lab work to think of these pipettes actually as akin to paintbrushes. They are that physical tool that enables you to move things around and essentially create something during your experiment. And so I found that really empowering as a scientist to start to think of myself as an artisan, and what I was doing in my everyday, sometimes mundane experiments was a form of creative expression. Beyond that shared tool of a pipette, I think science also usually requires some very specialized techniques. And so the next two examples are from my field of developmental biology and the zebrafish embryo. And the first technique that is really near and dear to my heart is that of the embryo microinjection. And so that setup is pictured here with the micromanipulator under your microscope. And what this micromanipulator enables you to do is take a needle, that tiny little sliver on the right of your screen, and inject tiny droplet of liquid, that red dot, into an embryo. And so this microinjection, as you can imagine, requires not only specialized tools, but a lot of coordination and control. And just for your own frame of reference of what scale this is on, that red droplet is 1 nanoliter. And 1 nanoliter is 1/1,000,000th the volume held in your quarter teaspoon in your kitchen. So we're emphasizing, we're working with these tiny, tiny volumes and these fine manipulations. Another more extreme example of my field of a specialized technique is that of embryo microsurgeries. So this video is showing my colleague, Shingo Miyagawa, removing part of the yolk cell of the embryo in order to study how embryo size impacts development. So he's using a very thin molded wire. But another tool that I've used for these same surgeries is actually a knife made out of your own eyebrow hair. And so I hope you can appreciate that these techniques not only take time and practice, but also there is a level of ingenuity and kind of having to MacGyver the tools that you need to interrogate the specific question that you want. And again, these are just examples from my field, and I can assure you that there are countless examples of these very specialized techniques in other fields as well. So this is why I view the doing of science as actually akin to an artisan apprenticeship. So I've talked about doing the science, but then, and the technique involved in that. But after you've gotten your results, how do you show or communicate your results? Another skill that lies behind all science is that of actually graphic design and the ability to display your data. And to be honest, this could be a whole talk in its own right. But today, I'm just going to show you that how you display your data matters. And this is an older version of a figure that I've made. And this is an example of figures that could be confusing, or maybe the colors aren't the best to look at, and it's not intuitive. And really, doesn't matter if you're a scientist or not. If it's not fun or engaging to look at, you're not really going to want to look that deep into it. So instead, here is the final version of that same figure. And there's actually more data in this, but the presentation has been streamlined. So another skill that scientists have is balancing showing the most precise data while also organizing and editing it so that it's comprehensible to others, not only in my direct field, but in other fields as well. We want to make our data as accessible as possible. And then to kind of the next level beyond data visualization is to actually look at your data in a purely creative way. And so that's what I did with this image, which I made for an art in science competition. And it shows the signaling gradient that I would measure for my PhD research. And it shows it both in a way where one stage is the Earth and another stage is different phases of the moon. And this is a cool image, I think. It's compelling. But then what's even neater is that there's real quantitative data underlying this image, which that could also be a little fun talk if anyone's ever interested in hearing the history behind this image. But the purpose of it really was fun. Was for me to express and show my hard scientific data in a way that felt just purely creative and expressive. And so I hope that also shows you how easily art and science can cross over, even with just our raw data in the first place. Cool. So I've talked about the technique or the how behind doing the science, and how that's kind of akin to some of the practicing of the visual arts. And now I'd like to move to the second part of my talk, which is really about the different messages or ideas that we can learn from both science and art that kind of philosophically tie into our everyday lives. And yes, I'll check in the discussion if we can touch base on these different parts of the talk more in the discussion, because I think we have a little bit of a delay with the comments. So we'll check in at the end. Thank you. But comments, so we remember to check in. Okay. So the first kind of common lesson between art and science that I found was finding beauty in the mundane or the everyday. So all of us are probably familiar with the fruit fly. These little guys fly around our kitchen or our apartments. They come in when we bring bananas home from the grocery store. They can be kind of annoying, but they are actually a really powerful model organism that's used in scientific research. And you can actually do very precise organ dissections out of these fruit flies and specific imaging. And so you can go from this picture of, common fruit fly and then reach these kind of otherworldly images. This image on the right is the eyes, and I'm really struck by this ethereal rippling in the eyes and the rainbow effect that you get from marking different types of cells with different color markers. In this same fruit fly, you can get these fractal-esque branches of the trachea, which are the lungs, essentially, of the fruit fly. Or you can go into the reproductive organs and see swirling sperm or a flowering ovary. And so altogether, I think the fruit fly can show us that there's more than initially meets the eye in this kind of common kitchen annoyance. And there can actually be breathtaking beauty in these everyday, sometimes frustrating things. So that was a science side of the beauty and the mundane. And to get to the art side, I would like to highlight this piece of work by Horace Pippin. And so Horace Pippin is actually a Black artist from Westchester, Pennsylvania. And this is on display at the Barnes here in Philadelphia. And so this is called Supper Time. And it's a pretty everyday, ordinary scene of a woman serving supper. And this is in line with Horace Pippin's usual subject matter, which are scenes from his childhood. And there are a few things that I'd like to point out to you. The first is that there isn't a lot of color, but the color that is used is pretty effective. The whites really pop off of that brown background. Me personally, I love the smooth roundedness of the blue in the dress of the female figure. And I think it lends this kind of softness and intimacy. And that's really remarkable because this was actually painted on multiple pieces of wood. So here's another view with some overhead raked lighting for this picture. And I hope you can appreciate that there's wood grain underneath this, all this painting, whether it's the literal wood of the table or the skin color of the figures in the piece. And then finally, the lines and curves of this piece were actually all burned into this panel with a hot poker, which is not an easy task. It does not sound easy, and it is not easy. And what's really remarkable is that actually Horace Pippin's right hand was injured when he served in World War I. So there's an incredible amount of effort and skill into every line in this piece. So here we have an everyday scene on an everyday material, wood, and it's been transformed through really dedicated precision and then also the painting skill into something that I find very intimate and steeped in that quiet beauty. And so it's really asking us to find beauty in those most everyday things. Okay. So this is my last kind of concept to go into. And this is a concept from chemistry. It's called dynamic equilibrium. And I love this concept, and I love how it connects to some of my favorite pieces of art. And so, what dynamic equilibrium means is that when you have a closed chemical system with two compartments and a material, these black dots that can pass in between the compartments, that material is going to go where it's not until you have equal amounts on both sides. It's really easy to think about water, how it'll go where it's not until it's equal on both sides. And so every chemical system wants to reach this state called steady state, where there's an equal amount on kind of both sides of the system. But what's really remarkable is that even at this steady state, there is still always motion and change. Molecules are still moving between the compartments, even though there's no net change. And so this concept actually really impacted my view on life and the surrounding world, because even at the molecular level, nothing is standing still, even at steady state. And so I've taken that scientific concept, and now we're going to see it in action through a couple pieces of art. Yes, so the first is the painting of the Libyan Sibyl by Michelangelo on the Sistine Chapel. And what I love about this piece is, I mean, as a painting, it's inherently static. It is literally just painted on a wall. But I hope you can appreciate how dynamic this image is, not only in the rendering of her billowing garments, but even more so in her actual physical position. So your video is not on. I'm going to ask you to try to recreate this position at home so you can really viscerally feel how dynamic it is. So she's twisting almost 90 degrees in her torso, which is really a dramatic twist. And then she is deftly balanced on her toes, all while lifting this enormous book of prophecies. So this is just such an athletic movement, and the rendition of it is so graceful and light. So I really think that this embodies that balance, yes, that came up in the comments, that concept of balance in motion that really is dynamic equilibrium. Another way to think of dynamic equilibrium is through this Monumental Mobile by Alexander Calder in the National Gallery in DC. So I grew up in the DC suburbs, so we'd go to the National Gallery either for school or with my family, and I always found this piece just astounding. It is massive. It is over 900 pounds of aluminum and steel. And what I find so remarkable is that it's essentially the same static structure. The pieces don't change, even though they're mobile. But the overall shape of the mobile can change. So you'll see in this other view, it's shifted. And that could be based on the air currents in the atrium, the amount of people in the atrium, or even the weather. And I love even thinking this is juxtaposed against that glass ceiling, So how you experience this mobile can change with the weather based on the backdrop. Is it a clear blue sky? Is it a dark cloudy day? And how will that impact your experience of this massive structure? And then what's more is that the atrium, that space in the National Gallery, is actually 2 floors. So you can see the mobile from below, which is those views on the left, or you can see them, you're kind of on the same level when you're on the 2nd floor. And so this becomes a different, kind of more immersive experience. And then furthermore, there will sometimes be different pieces of art from various exhibitions on the walls. And so then this mobile starts to interact with those, depending on what's on exhibit. And so as opposed to the Libyan Sibyl, which was depicting motion, you have this mobile that actually is in motion and really interacting with its environment in kind of all dimensions, which I think is just really cool, and hope you guys found exciting as well. And you can look for these other examples of dynamic equilibrium in your own lives. And another just little teaser, another concept that I think would be great to talk about in the future that connects both art and science is that of perspective. It can really unite pieces from ancient Egypt or the 19th century or more contemporary pieces. And then it can also really track various scientific breakthroughs with changes in our perspective. So that's kind of a plug for a potential future talk. But it's also really, I want it to serve as a reminder of the breadth and potential of the similarities between art and science as disciplines. And it's not just what I'm showing you all today. These are kind of my highlight reel, and I can't wait to get into the discussion in a little bit to hear your own thoughts or ideas or observations. So I've been able to talk today about the techniques that can drive science and how that can be related to these artisanal techniques. And then the fact that both art and science have so much in common in their potential to communicate things about our world together. And in closing, I'll really just generalize that anyone, I think, can be an artist or scientist. All you have to do is take a look around and then do something with it. Essentially, in art and science, you're just observing your surroundings and being curious, and then express yourself. You're either expressing yourself through exploring further and doing an experiment, or through creating with a material, or, I've focused on visual arts, but there are a lot of other types of art as well. It's really just all about interacting with the world around you. And so that's really what I was hoping to bring together today, is that sense of empowerment in your own innate curiosity, that you can be a scientist or an artist or both at the same time. And I will just leave you with my favorite time lapse of all time, and ask you what inspires your own sense of wonder, and where can you see the world with both the eyes of a scientist and the eyes of an artist. In this way, I think art and science can be great equalizers and sources of connection to each other. And we all have these capabilities inside of us. And so I'm really happy to have shared this with you. And kind of made our own connections together tonight. And so with that, I think we're starting to get some questions in the comments. But right before we get into the discussion, I'll just put up a few acknowledgements. The first, as Naomi mentioned, today is Indigenous Peoples Day. And so we really must acknowledge that Philadelphia, where this event is hosted and where I live and did my graduate training, is the ancestral land of the Lenni Lenape people. And so for those in this area, I really encourage you to check out lenapenation.org to learn more. And ways to support and become involved with this community that still remains vital an aspect to our current Philadelphia community in its entirety. And if you're interested, also there is activismbeyondtheclassroom.com, which is a Philadelphia, West Philly initiative that has some really great podcasts and interviews with some current members of the Lenape tribe. So that's a way to get involved. I'd like to thank Science on Tap for hosting, and National Mechanics and Science History Institute for putting this up. And then finally, just some resources. Those Drosophila images come from nikonsmallworld.com. So if those were enthralling to you, I really recommend that you check them out. There are even more on that nikonsmallworld.com. And then finally, another free resource is the Barnes Foundation YouTube channel. If you have never been to the Barnes in Philadelphia, if you do not live in Philadelphia, I highly, highly recommend this channel. They do spotlights every week on the pieces in their collection. And there's just some of the most incredible art I've ever seen there. And so it's fantastic that there is a free resource to learn more about those pieces. So with that, I'm sorry we didn't get to interact as much during the talk. I'm on, I think, a 20-30 second delay with the comments. So we can go into discussion if there are any other questions. I think I saw some earlier.
So thank you, Francesca. That was a really awesome talk. Actually got me liking, for a brief second, fruit flies, which I don't normally...
Right?
Not
See,
normally
before
a fan
you,
of.
yeah, before you like make the trap and want to get rid of them, you got to think of those like fractal trachea and all those cool images.
Yeah, some of those images were just so beautiful. So, I mean, I still don't want them in my kitchen, but I can appreciate them as I get rid of them.
Yeah.
So we do have a bunch of different questions and also some really great observations that have been coming in through the chat. So one of the first observations we had here from SMC Kanadi. I do apologize if I mispronounced that. But they are an art historian actually in Philly, so they're pretty local, and they loved your talk. And they brought up the connections between skills and elements between art and the health sciences, which I think is really interesting. It reminds me of some of those early books in the 19th century, where you see kind of these what look to be beautiful drawings, but of the anatomy of different bodies, to talk about different diseases and cures or things that could possibly help with different diseases that they had at the time. And this kind of bridge the gap between, is this beautiful art or is it just something necessary for medical doctors studying at the time? So thank you for bringing that connection up, because we do see a lot of those throughout in our collection and in other collections as well. And they also had a question that I'll bring up on the screen here. So SMC Kanadi again is asking, do you make these connections to art in your classes?
So I'm actually not teaching right now. So this is how I make those connections, is kind of to the general public. I think it would be really forward thinking of people who are teachers and generating curricula, especially in like colleges of arts and sciences or even in high school education, just to consider how we perhaps silo art and science through courses and coursework. And that I am obviously of the belief that artists can benefit from understanding some of the more kind of precision or quantitative sides, and you see some artists that's really is what they do, but including that in part of their training. And then especially with scientists, I think that would make um, really just innovative minds if they also had their training in the health sciences too, just including thinking about their own skills that way. I think that can empower scientists, and then also really work that creative muscle, because that's what creativity is. It's something you have to practice. It's something both intellectual, but then also I hope you got from this talk, there's this tactile element of physically creating something, if that's with your hands or, designers using a computer, that's still that form of creation. So yes, I'd love the opportunity to work a course like that.
Yeah, I think that would be a wonderful course to attend. And I know there's a really big push to get scientists or those on different tracks for different field tracks within science to really take some more kind of those liberal arts
Absolutely.
classes to try and bring that kind of human aspect into it as they're doing this science track. So I think that would mesh really really well with a lot of what we're seeing kind of changing and being pushed for in the field. So we have actually a question about a specific theory from Kelly Hollahan. Hi, Kelly. They're asking, are there any connections in science that you can make with the Gestalt's theory?
Ooh, Kelly, you have out art science art history arted me. I am not familiar with that. So if you can elaborate in the comments, or we can talk later on that. I am not, it is not coming up in my brain right now, any familiarity with that. So
So yeah,
I will have to look that up.
yeah, and we'll keep an eye on the chat and see if Kelly expands a little bit more on that theory for us. We've got see Lily here. Oh, lots of great questions coming in, everyone. Thank you so much. So Lily asks, do you think we as humans innately seek out to recreate some of those elements we experience in science / the natural world? It's a really great question.
Yeah, Lily, I think that's fantastic. Lily actually she was with me in my semester abroad, and she is the one who, I have to give her a shout out. She explained Impressionism to me. It was still, I was kind of in my budding art history phase. And so Lily is a huge part of my journey to where I am today. And so I think from my personal experience and awareness of this, I think there's perhaps a distinction between recreating, versus seeking. I think that kind of in that concept of balance or dynamic equilibrium, we're always living in the physical world, the natural world. And so I think usually our bodies, our minds seem to be most in harmony when it's in alignment with the natural world. I think we're seeing that health wise. Just easy example of us sitting at our desks on Zoom all the time. That's not how our bodies were designed. We're not really we're not really engaging with how our bodies were meant to be made as much. And so I think we're at kind of a point right now where we're having to decide, well, how much of that kind of development and separation from nature, which is good, is now kind of leading to too far, where we're part of our humanity, both physically and spiritually, is in the natural world and how we connect to that, whether that's physically or then also through artistic expressions, that sense of community, that kind of innovation and even artistic pieces bring to us. Yeah, Lily, I think we try, but we're also in our modern world, so there's a little bit of conflict there.
Yeah, and I think just how important art has become to the new world that we're kind of in the middle of living in.
Mm-hmm.
And just, a lot of people seeking that out for many different reasons, sometimes to just remember what they used to do before the pandemic hit, or just try and find a human connection to something, and they're seeking that out in various forms of art. So I think
Absolutely.
we're kind of seeing a little bit more of that recently as well.
Absolutely.
So another great question coming in, this one from Jason. Hi, Jason. Thank you for your question. Jason asks, what are your thoughts about combining science and art to better communicate and engage people on those kind of big, hard to grasp problems? And some of the examples that Jason includes is climate change, the hesitancy around getting the vaccine, and different things like that. So I think that's a really great question. And how we might be able to engage people in those conversations using art and science.
Yes, I think about this a lot, Jason, and kind of what angle to come at it from, because there are a lot of different angles right now. And the angle that I see it from first as a scientist is, that's my primary profession, is as a scientist. And so with some of these problems you mentioned, like climate crisis or vaccine hesitancy, I think it can be helpful to lean in to what we're taught from the humanities of really trying to understand where the other people are coming from, trying to buy into our collective humanity in that understanding, and taking that broader view of, well, why would there be hesitancy? Is it in this one issue, or is there something broader? And so my opinion of kind of combining science and art to engage with these kind of tough topics, mine is kind of a preventative approach or opinion, that we need to just start engaging people more in their everyday lives with critical thinking. I think that's what the pandemic and different aspects of global climate change have taught us, is that there can be a level of distrust between the public and scientists. So I think some of the onus is on scientists of how do we engage better, how do we kind of show and connect to our humanity, and then who's succeeding as a scientist. And that is one way where I think the institutions that perform science and research or fund science and research could probably improve, is supporting those scientists who have that more holistic background, of valuing that in our scientific cultures, that those become the representatives. Because definitely not all scientists are engaged with everyday people and thinking about everyday people in their in communicating their research or in interacting with them as well. But I think that's something that, Jason, I'd love to talk to you more about, because it's complicated and over a broad timeline too.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanna circle back to Kelly, who explained the Gestalt. I think it's Gestalt theory a little bit. Kelly wrote, "There's 5 principles: proximity, similarity, continuity, closure, and connectedness." So I, just as someone who likes to look at art and appreciates what was done, because other than color by numbers, I'm not an artist myself, but I feel like there's probably a lot of great connections within that theory between science and art, especially this idea of like connectedness. I feel like we could probably see a lot of that in different types of art.
Absolutely. And I think Kelly was asking in her original question about kind of bring science into that. And I mean, kind of off the cuff, I'm getting an idea for, this would be another great talk, is to go into, there are lots of examples in science where things really depend on proximity. So cell-cell contacts are a huge kind of guiding principle of developmental biology and cell biology and a lot of different disciplines, is that actual proximity of different cells or cell types. And yeah, just kind of these other concepts of similarity. And that is a principle that's used not by nature, but that shows up in nature as well, of similar things sorting together, similar cell types, or molecules aggregating. And so that does happen. Kind of this kind of like a dynamic equilibrium is a principle of science. There are certain principles that I do think mirror what Kelly is talking about. And I really love the idea of continuity. That is something that I studied in part for my PhD, was development over time. And so time is a huge part of the scientific process. When you're asking a particular question in science, there's always the context of, well, when is this happening in an organism's lifetime or in the development of a disease state? And is it on the order of milliseconds or is it on the order of decades? And so really, this is super fascinating, Kelly, and really inspirational. I'm so happy that you were able to make it and bring this up.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. So we have a few minutes left, and I think we're gonna tackle one more question. This one comes from Corey. So thank you for putting this in the chat, Corey. Corey asks, what challenges do you feel exist for scientists when communicating their work to the general public? And do artists experience anything similar when trying to convey meaning in their work to their audience? It's a really wonderful question, Corey. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Corey, for this question. I think for scientists in communicating their work to the general public, having more venues to do that, and so it's kind of that access to the public. And I think that Science on Tap is a great example of this kind of well-established venue for it, but providing more venues where they become almost like town halls. So a lot of scientific research is funded by the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, which is funded by tax dollars. So I think that is somewhere where there could be a lot more, there's a lot of space for interaction, where it's not just me getting up, giving a talk and people listening, but that town hall kind of atmosphere that's happening more regularly, so that the regular public can see the impact of the work and also understand the process of science. I think that's something that is challenging to scientists, and we're seeing that play out for the past 18 months with the pandemic, is that science, while it is precise, it is not a linear endeavor. We don't know everything from the beginning. There is a lot of interrogation that has to go on. It is finding, there's no like right answer that you just have to find. There's a lot that you have to move around. So I think that having kind of more of those check-ins with the public and kind of a more community base where there's bi-directional talk, not just the scientist telling the public, but the public becoming, engaged and the scientist listening, that can allow for that type of understanding. And, with artists, I think I imagine that's kind of similar, is just really finding the right venues to access the people, your desired audience. And I think something that artists and scientists share is that after you put something out there, whether it's your results or it's an exhibition or it's a performance, you lose control of it in some ways. People will interpret it how they interpret it. They can like it, they can not like it, they can disagree with it. And I think that could be something where scientists could learn from artists, learning of how to take critiques, or also how to I don't know, I can't think of the right word, but like go with the flow. Like after you've put something out there, it becomes communal, it becomes collective. So instead of thinking of your science as it's mine, I'm the only right person, thinking of, okay, this is what I've put out here. Let's see what the community or what the collective makes of it. And that can be part of the scientific experience as well. So I think Corey really tapped into the concept of community and kind of collectiveness that I think artists more intentionally tap into directly, and scientists could tap into more.
That's a really great insight, and I definitely think with what we've seen over the last 18 months, having a little bit more, I guess, flexibility, right? That's been kind of the term for the last almost 2 years, and being kind of open to having those discussions and really being able to answer those questions and break things down in a way that it's a little more understandable and, you know, can kind of connect to the everyday. So yeah, I would love to see more of that in the future, especially from science. It is so important and it's affected our lives in so many different ways. So being able to kind of have something similar to what we're on now, like Science on Tap, or any kind of other forum where we can be open about the questions we have about things and the explanations for things, I think would be really, really great. And it's an awesome way actually to end our talk. That was
Perfect.
awesome. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, Francesca. It was wonderful. And thank you everyone for joining us to help kick off our Science on Tap season. So Francesca, I'm going to let you go, but everyone else stay on for just a minute. I've got a few reminders for you. So Francesca, we'll talk to you later. Have a great night. Thank you again for
thanks
joining
everyone.
us. So everyone, just a reminder for our next Science on Tap, that's going to be next month. It's going to be Monday, November 8th at 6 p.m. It's going to feature Adam Doosan, who's the founder of 100 Fruit Farms. His talk's going to be focusing on permaculture and agroecology. So please keep your eye out on our Facebook and on our website for more information regarding his talk, as well as a link to register. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you so much for your wonderful questions and your insights. It was fabulous to be back. Thank you again to Francesca for joining us. And I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. See you guys later.